Shortly after the start of the American Civil War, the Model 1860 Spencer infantry rifle became the world's first magazine-fed repeating infantry rifle to be officially adopted, granted in small numbers, for U.S. Army use. Since then, many historians, both professionals and amateurs, have asked the question, why didn't the Union Army adopt the Spencer in greater numbers instead of relying on the older, slower muzzleloading Springfield .58 caliber rifle musket and others like it, including the pattern 1853 Enfield? I'm Brett Gibbons from papercartridges.com, and in this video we will compare the Model 1860 magazine-fed repeating rifle with the single-shot Model 1861 percussion rifle musket in a historical battlefield context. Unfortunately, some high winds at our desert shooting site and a terribly timed microphone failure mean that you'll have to put up with me narrating for some of this video.
Load.
We like to compare military rifles in a historical context as a form of experimental archaeology. So like any other scientific experimentation, we need to get several data points in order to make a reasonably accurate scientific comparison.
Oh ja, schön.
Chris and I will shoot the Spencer and Springfield comparison in 4 tables. The first table is 10 rounds rapid with the stopwatch running, shooting at a target between 150 and 200 yards. Since most scholarship estimates about 150 yards as the average range of an American Civil War infantry engagement. So obviously this is where the Spencer really needs to stretch its legs. Second table is 10 rounds deliberate fire at a long-range target between 450 and about 500 yards. Now, Civil War soldiers rarely fired at these sort of distances in battle, since they had very little, if any, formal musketry instruction. But practically every military in the second half of the 19th century considered, well, even into the early 20th century, actually, considered effectiveness at long range to be absolutely essential for any infantry rifle. So that's why we're going to consider this in this comparison. For the third table, we'll be testing penetration by firing at some target boxes. So they've got 6 boards with 2-inch thick planks of Douglas fir in them. This test is inspired by a practical test the U.S. Army Ordnance Department did in 1855 when they were trying to determine what rifle and bullet to replace the old smoothbore musket with. Of course, they were shooting at 1-inch thick white pine boards, but pine is twice as expensive per board foot, at least here, than Douglas fir. So that's why we went with the fir. You need to keep in mind, though, that in the mid-19th century, it's simply not enough for a bullet to disable an enemy soldier. It has to be effective against cavalry. Cavalry is the decisive arm of the 19th century battlefield. So a light bullet or an underpowered cartridge could fail to stop charging cavalry, and that right there could be the difference between winning or losing a battle, or at least a crucial point of a battle. So the Army Ordnance Department understood very well, in 1855, that we have to adopt a rifle that is sufficiently powered at these intermediate ranges to be effective, not just against personnel, but cavalry as well. And you'll have to wait and see what the fourth table is, but it's a lot of fun. We hope this experimental archaeology can answer 2 historical questions that people are still fighting about on internet message boards all the time. So the first hypothesis is that the Spencer's superior performance justifies its much higher cost. Now, we know the Spencer was the quote-unquote better rifle. After all, the Spencer's a magazine-fed repeating rifle shooting metallic cartridges, and the Springfield cartridge is a paper bag with a chunk of lead and gunpowder in it, and you have to shove the bullet down the gun barrel with a long metal stick. But how much better was the Spencer? Is one soldier with a Spencer rifle worth two with Springfields? Or three? Or five? And our second hypothesis is that the U.S. Army's chief of ordnance during the start of the Civil War, Brigadier General James Wolfe Ripley, made an enormous mistake by refusing to manufacture more repeaters or breech loaders for the Union Army, and instead emphasized production of the older single-shot rifle-musket.
Hi, I'm Brett. I'm here with...
Yeah, the microphone failed, and it makes that incredibly annoying buzzing sound through pretty much all the video we took. So I'll just have to voice over as best I can. So here I am introducing the Model 1861 Springfield, and Chris is bragging about his newfangled Jimcrack Spencer repeating rifle, and he says something snarky about how he's going to beat me, and I say, ha ha ha, we'll see. And then more banter back and forth, and then we say, well, let's go shoot some stuff. The 1861 Springfield was a simplification of the more complex Model 1855 rifle musket. The 1861 version was cheaper and easier to produce. It cost $13, and about 1 million of them were produced, making it the most widely used infantry weapon of the American Civil War. It fired a 500-grain, 58 caliber Meunier-style Burton bullet at about 1,000 feet per second. The rifle had simple but effective leaf sights graduated for 100, 300, and 500 yards. A well-trained soldier could manage about 3 rounds per minute, although in combat this was rarely achieved. I've shot thousands of paper cartridges from rifle muskets, and I am pretty fast, but the best I can manage with the 61 Springfield is about 2.5 rounds a minute.
Rolling. Load.
You can see the target in the distance. It's a 4-foot square steel target, and we didn't know exactly how far away it was, so that we would have to estimate our own distances, just like a soldier would have in the Civil War. The best thing about steel targets is the awesome clang they make when a slow-moving heavy piece of lead smacks into them. I'll speed the video up so you don't have to watch 5 minutes of ramming. Now, as you can see, I'm pretty fast with the rifle musket, but I'm still barely managing about 2 rounds a minute. This rate of fire seems excruciatingly slow to us today. Even at this slow rate of fire, a frisky soldier could fire off his 40 rounds in 20 minutes, leaving him entirely out of ammunition. And cartridges are heavy, soldiers can't carry very many of them. General Ripley, like most of his contemporaries, was afraid that soldiers armed with breech loaders would fire off their cartridges in 5 minutes or less, leaving them defenseless. This seems silly to us today, but we live in an era when soldiers carry a basic load of 210 rounds. Civil War soldiers carried 40 to 60 rounds, and when they ran out, they couldn't just grab another box of 5.56 from the Humvee. The realities of 1860s military logistics meant that the wagons with the ammo could be miles away, or maybe even days away. Instead of a combat multiplier, General Ripley and most of his contemporaries thought rapid-firing infantry rifles could be a liability Repeating rifles were also totally new. They had never been used, let alone tested and proven in any sort of combat. It's worth remembering that the rifle-musket was also new technology. The U.S. Army's first rifle-musket was only adopted in 1855, but the rifle-musket had been famously tested and proven in the Crimean War only 4 years before the start of the Civil War. By emphasizing rifle-musket production, General Ripley was not condemning the Union Army to use an obsolete or antiquated piece of technology. The Union Army needed hundreds of thousands of good rifles right now. This wasn't the time to experiment with adopting an untested and new technology. Even the rifle-musket was too advanced for most Civil War soldiers, who had no musketry instruction to speak of. Historian Patty Griffith said there's little to suggest Civil War soldiers judged distances or even set their sights in battle. Officers told their men to simply aim low. If you're keeping score at home, that was 6 hits out of 10 in 4 minutes and 49 seconds. Christopher Spencer designed what would become the Model 1860 Spencer rifle in his 20s in his part-time. His concept would become the first magazine-fed repeating rifle ever officially adopted by any military. A tube magazine in the rifle stock held 7 rounds of 50 caliber metallic rimfire cartridges. These were so modern, you'd need a license to buy them today in California. The new rifle's potential was quickly recognized by none less than President Lincoln and General McClellan.
Rolling. Load.
The new rifle was so new, there was no good way to carry the ammunition for it. So soldiers carried the rounds in pockets or, as we see here, in the standard issue 58 caliber cartridge box. Again, sorry about the wind. It was a blustery day. Remember that this table is 10 rounds, so that's why Chris only loads 3. With the Spencer, Chris put 10 rounds downrange in 1 minute 18 seconds, but there were only 4 hits. Springfield at 400-ish yards. And this has had some rounds through it, so I'm going to start with one of my Williams cleaners. So the Williams bullet was designed to be a better bullet than the Minier or Burton, and it also had the happy effect of doing a better job cleaning your bore. By 1864, when Spencer rifles were finally being seen in numbers, most soldiers armed with rifle muskets were being issued ammunition with 3 to 6 Williams cleaner bullets in each pack of ammunition. Technically, that's an anachronism, because Elijah Williams never intended his round to be a cleaning bullet. He designed it to be simply a more accurate bullet. But since it obturates the bore better than a mini ball, it had a cleaning effect, so to speak. Sorry about the buzzing. That's my failed microphone.
Off to a good start.
That took an unsettlingly long time for the sound to get back.
Well, it's either me talking or my microphone buzzing, so I guess I'll think of something to say. At $40 a rifle, a Spencer cost as much as 3 Springfields. To justify such a cost, the Spencer would have to be superior to the Springfield across a broad spectrum of battlefield capabilities. In steady, trained hands, the Springfield could and did hit at ranges up to 500 yards.
Good enough for government. It's a 4-foot tall target, so there is a lot of forgiveness.
That extra 75 yards will take up some of that. Low.
Our load with the Springfield is 65 grains of 1F black powder behind the Lyman 575-213 old style mini ball that we sized down to .574. Now, of course, a 574 bullet leaves a lot of windage in a 58 caliber rifle, so this probably isn't the best short-range target bullet. But in battlefield conditions, when rate of fire and sustainment of fire is important, the bullet does very well.
Yep.
Low.
Same spot.
Yep.
Really?
These are both 65. Try those next. It was hitting.
So I don't lose my count.
Of course, on this day with no wind, my microphone has to fail.
Wide right.
Sometimes the black powder gods are just in cruel and capricious moods. So I take one more shot, then pass the rifle off to Chris to see if he can't do any better.
Sight.
Yeah, those 5 grains make a difference, don't they?
Yes, they do.
5 grains.
The cartridges I had been shooting were loaded with 60 grains instead of our usual 65 grains, so I'd like to think that was why I was missing, but in reality it was probably me.
That little tiny bit more of expansion.
Well, the service charge was... Can you read that? 65 grains musket powder. So that was what they call the service charge with the later 574 caliber bullets, which these are. So, as normal, folks in the 19th century had it figured out. Skipped in. Hits a hit.
That counts.
Bring the good old bugle boys, we'll sing another song. Sing it with a spirit that will start the world along. Sing it as we used to sing it, 50,000 strong. While we were...
That was me.
About a foot low.
That was me. This is my last 65 grain load.
We know the Williams hits.
I had 3 rounds in my box. This is the 3rd, which means I have 2 more.
The buzzing is so bad here that I just turned the sound completely off.
Second time out with this rifle, and it is doing exactly as prescribed. 65 grains, rifle power.
5.74 bullet. This is available where? Where do you find these mini balls at?
Papercartridges.com, I think.
That's what I thought.
It's a really difficult name to remember.
No, which is,
That was just in front of it.
So, the moral of the story is we need 65 grains.
For this particular rifle, yes, 65 grain charges, sling them in.
Is that 10 or 9?
That was 10. So, but for the 65
Shoot
grain,
the Williams.
for the 65 grain rounds, we fired 4 out of 5
Yeah.
hit. So it's a 65
and
grain
one
load.
of the Williams.
Yep.
Let's just say this is substituting for one of the...
What powder charge do you have behind the Williams bullets in your cartridges?
Those are 55 grains of old Einsford 2F.
Okay.
It's a heavier bullet.
Yeah. But that's a much faster powder than the 1F.
I haven't found published loads for the Williams. I assume it was probably still 65. Hit.
Well,
So-
that load works with the Williams, but it expands much more rapidly.
Yeah.
And it is a faster
Well, that's
powder.
why I wanted the faster powder. The 2F Old Einsford's pretty fine. So, I'm a history major, so I lost count of how many hits that was. But like
That was
6 or
six.
7.
It was six of 11. 2 Williams and 4
No,
with
I
the
think
60.
it was 7 of 11.
Well, we'll have to go back to the
Yeah.
tape for that.
But anyway,
But all this, for this rifle, the actual service charge of
it
1F
is-
go
we
X.
have established, as we knew we would. We've
Yeah.
established that 58 caliber rifle musket with the service ammunition all over a target, a 4-foot tall target at
475
about
yards.
500 yards. Yeah, 400 or 500 yards.
And
Whereas,
I'm going to concede, I'm not even going to shoot the Spencer at 500 yards. I'm not even going to shoot the Spencer at 500 yards. We're having issues getting it on a 12-inch target at 200 yards from a bench. So expending ammunition needlessly into the hill, trying to hit a 500-yard shot with the rifle is just not a good use of time or money.
but the Spencer never really made the claim to be a
No,
long
and
range.
I think the footage we got yesterday of shooting it at the 150 to 175 yard targets for volume of fire speaks for itself, especially when you take into account the battlefield distance study, where the average Civil War
yeah, it
infantry
was-
engagement's 184 yards or less, which is roughly what we were shooting. That battle space, the Spencer
The
absolutely
Spencer would have
owns.
been
But
exceptionally effective.
for
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 our
as
purposes.
advertised, the one thing I will harken back to Mr. Spencer and complain about is this fiddly bit here. It's graduated to 900 yards. What were you smoking? Because it ain't happening. I've fired approximately 120 rounds out of this rifle today and have hit exactly nothing
Well, I can tell
beyond
you,
200 yards.
I can tell you why it was graduated to 9, because that was the War Department requirement. If they're
Yes.
adopting a rifle,
Which,
it has to have that
taking into
capability.
account this was done by the man who accepted a 10,000 rifle contract without having a factory to make them in, that does make sense. So we're not going to shoot the Spencer at 500 yards. It needs a lot more load development than it currently has into it, and even then I think that's beyond the pale.
Well, the problem is the black powder. You
Yeah.
can only pack so much black powder into a case, and the case is full.
Yep.
So
So now we will move on to other, hopefully more fun tests. So let's shoot something else. Rolling. So, having done some shooting, quite a bit of it actually, it has come to mind that there are some points we need to go over with the Spencer, knowing that we will be called out in the commentary for it if I don't. Now, everyone knows, or at least has access to, the loading in 9 times, the British rifle-musket loading manual, and if you've watched some of the shooting video of the Spencer prior to this, you will note that the manual of arms for the Spencer is different. It is also very difficult to find. There are only 2 truly solid literary works on the Spencer. There is the McQueen book and the Roy Marcoux book. Now, bear in mind that the drill manual that was come up with for the Spencer infantry rifle was not officially sanctioned by the United States Army. It was come up at the regimental level by 2 different officers who had armed their own regiments with Spencer rifles at their personal expense. They came up with it on the fly, but used it through the duration of their service life as a regiment. Now, the primary thing that I know we're going to get called out on, and I'll show you now, the rifle is empty, is when I'm loading this weapon in a standing position, I am placing the muzzle on the toe of my boot. Now, it is important to notice that when I run the lever, unlike, let's say, Winchesters or Marlins or Henrys, the hammer does not cock, and this is a hammer-fired weapon. So, theoretically, I am safe having the muzzle on the toe of my boot. Also, there is no round in the chamber. You would be loading from an empty chamber in most cases. So, by the manual, bearing in mind there is the butt trap on this end and a delicate crown on this end, order arms was done on the toe of the boot, in place rest was done on the toe of the boot, and loading was done on the toe of the boot. Because holding, this is an 11.5 pound rifle empty, holding it and managing a magazine tube and then fumbling loose cartridges from a box, pocket, or even the Blakesley tubes is going to be a mess. So, on the boot. Then per the manual, you flip it open, remove the magazine tube follower, grip it with these 2 fingers. Then, for convenience, I'll load with the Blakesley box. You can draw your loader, dump your rounds, return the tube, or in combat conditions, dispose of it. Insert the follower. Now, the rifle is loaded, but it is not charged, nor is it cocked. Then, of course, firing by the manual, it was drawn to what would be the ready position with a rifled musket and charged. Then the commands would be ready, aim, and fire, if firing in volleys. And there's 7. Now, rifle is empty, hammer is not cocked, action is closed, then return it to the toe, withdraw your magazine, rinse, lather, and repeat. Certainly a step away from the rifle musket loading procedures, and I will admit, having been a long-time muzzleloader, muzzleloading shooter myself. This is not intuitive. However, it is how it was done, and that's how we will do it here. Onward to further science.
We won't win the Oscar for continuity, but the winds yesterday, 30 some knot winds, not only made shooting practically impossible, but the microphone stopped picking up any sound other than the wind, so we had to stop shooting yesterday. This morning it's perfect, pristine conditions, so we're transitioning back to the penetration testing between the Spencer rifle and the Springfield. Target's at about 200-ish yards and it's 12 foot square, so may take a time or two to hit it. We'll see. I may have got it. Let's see. So at 200-ish yards, through 8 inches of fur. And it actually may have gone sky high because I don't see any lead in here. Yeah, it might have blown it up. So, might take another crack at it now that I know where it's shooting. That's a lower hit. And it did the, wow, it really turned. And it stopped again at 8 inches. So 8, oh, there it is. There's what's left of that Minier ball. So 8 inches of Douglas fir at 200 yards, which I'm a little surprised. I expected it to go through at least 10 because the tests in 1855 demonstrated it was penetrating 11 inches of white pine at 200 yards. So the Douglas fir might not puncture as easily, and it's surprising how the round veers off course. It doesn't punch straight through. It hits and then it moved diagonally. But 8 inches, and Yeah, in fact, I don't know if you can see. Can you see that impact right here? That's where it stopped. I don't know if the light is good enough to see that. But try it. 2, 4, 6, 8. The 9th inch of wood stopped it. I don't know if you can see it. It's all right. It's right here. So you'll see that little smudge mark. Yeah. So. Well, in the name of science. Oh, here's the other one. Cool. All right, now it's the Spencer's turn. So we have transitioned to the Spencer. I don't know if they can see. You know, we should have put the kill cam out there.
I've never benched this gun.
That target out there to the right of that Joshua tree is the Douglas fir box.
I need someone to spot fall of shot.
Can you, because I'm looking through a screen.
I'll attempt it. Well, that's not promising. In here I have my screwdriver set. Would you mind?
Yeah. So what's going on here, Chris?
We're having light primer strikes.
Oh, you mean the newfangled gimcrack is having trouble?
Yep.
Wow. Who could have ever anticipated this? All right. Clean bore. Let's try again.
That's right. I bothered.
Right. The sun is pretty wicked here.
Right. Right. I'm holding left. That doesn't want to feed either. Not a good day for the Spencer so far.
Note to self, look up some good technical difficulties standing by music. So this isn't a
I think
hit what you aim it at
just
sort of
flipped
gun,
it,
is
or
it?
maybe just left.
It was just left, I think.
Just left and low.
Well, we've established one thing. It does not shoot to the sights. It was
Right.
wildly right, and I'm holding on the target.
Right again. Left. I think just right.
I think that was directly in front.
A gallant effort.
Yeah, I'm gonna call it. We know it'll do.
After pointlessly blazing away at the 200-yard target, Chris moves a bit closer to can't possibly miss at this range distance.
Center of mass hit.
That is a nice center of mass hit.
1, 2, 3, 4. Stopped in the 4.
No, that's concerning because that means the 61's going to go right through. So that went through. It was stopped in the fifth, so it went through 10 inches at 25 yards. So if you were shooting at cavalry at this range, that would have been very effective. I'm impressed. That penetrated a lot more pieces of wood than I expected.
You want to step the Springfield out further? Because this I can shoot it a second time. In the name of science.
Well, I think we know the Springfield will go through all 6.
5 of the 6 boards at 25 yards. And the Springfield did that at 200 yards. So we'll extrapolate.
We can extrapolate.
Wildly right again.
Hit the Joshua tree.
Well, that time
Murderer.
Anyway.
In absolute desperation, Chris finally moves up to within 25 yards of the target. So close that even a Spencer can't possibly miss.
That is a nice center of mass hit.
1, 2, 3, 4. Stopped in the 4.
Upon closer examination later, we determined that the Spencer bullet actually made it through the first 5 of the fir boards. This means the Spencer penetrated 10 inches of fir planks at 25 yards. When we fired at the same target off camera with the 61 Springfield, the bullet went through all 12 inches of fir at 25 yards. We know from Ordnance Department tests in 1855 that the 61 Springfield penetrated 11 inches of white pine at 200 yards. In our test at 200 yards, it penetrated 8 inches of fir. So doing some history major math, we can assume that the Spencer at 25 yards would have penetrated 13.75 inches of white pine. We can estimate that at 200 yards, the Spencer would penetrate about 4 inches of white pine, enough to stop a soldier, but probably not a charging cavalry horse. On the other hand, the 1861 Springfield retains enough power and energy out to about 1,000 yards to be effective against personnel as well as cavalry. So what does all this mean? Realistically, at most close-range Civil War battle distances up to 150 yards, the Spencer's 350 grain, 50 caliber bullet would be highly effective. Beyond point-blank range, however, the 5650 Spencer's short, heavy bullet drops off the ballistic cliff, even by 1860 standards. It's pretty anemic for a military round, but if a more powerful cartridge was used, Christopher Spencer wouldn't have been able to fit many rounds into the stock magazine, and that would defeat the whole point of a repeating rifle. We set out to answer these persistent questions. First, the Spencer's performance probably did justify its much greater cost, at least in the American Civil War context, where most infantry combat was at fairly short ranges. The Spencer fired 3 times faster than the Springfield in our demonstration. As long as ammunition could be supplied, the Spencer's battlefield performance would likely make up for its substantially higher cost and complex manufacturing requirements. The Spencer's real problems weren't with the rifle itself, it was with logistics and procurement, which neatly brings us to the next question we answered. Chief of Ordnance James Wolfe Ripley probably did make the correct decision to emphasize rifle-musket production instead of grinding everything to a halt and retooling for Spencer production. Ripley brought Union factories quickly into full swing in an astonishingly short time and produced hundreds of thousands of Springfield rifle muskets that gave Union troops an edge over Confederates in pivotal battles like Antietam. Historians estimate it would have taken 6 to 12 months to retool the Union's arsenals and factories to begin producing Spencer rifles in large numbers. This means Union soldiers in 1861 and 62 would be marching into battle with antique smoothbores and assorted European imports. Of course, if that happened, armchair historians today would be condemning Ripley for his rash decision to adopt an expensive, complicated, and untested repeating rifle in the middle of a raging war. What was he thinking?
Well, that was interesting and some excellent experimental archaeology. However, you have a magazine-fed repeating rifle.
Praise be unto God.
I was shooting a single-shot muzzleloader. If you really want to evaluate a magazine-fed repeating rifle,
I love how this is magically about now what I want.
you need to put it up against a magazine-fed repeating rifle.
Oh, I didn't realize you owned a Henry.
Well, you know.
That's
Pretty
fair.
close.
That's fair.
Actually, hold on. Okay, much better. Let's test repeating magazine rifle against repeating magazine rifle.
And now for something completely different.
Rolling. So what do you say? 14 rounds versus 15 rounds? Rapid fire, independent?
I think that's fair. Shall we?
Let's do it. Gotta have some of our offset production crew call out the command to load.
Load!
That was close. We were within a second of each other, I think.
Well, that clearly goes to show the Lee Enfield is better than a Spencer.
By how much?
Whew, that
was
is
actually-
a workout.
It was. I was actually hitting. I'm kind of surprised.
Whew. Good old 3 or 3. No rim jam. I'm happy. But the difference is that this rifle was designed for rapid fire charger loading. That, I don't even know what you had in 1860, but you have a magazine-fed rapid fire repeating rifle that can maintain the same approximate rate of fire as a freaking SMLE, which is, everyone says, oh, that's the fastest bolt action rifle. Same rate of fire with something from 1860. That is a statement of how impressive that technology really was.
Volume of fire. Volume of fire and copious amounts of arm strength. Running a Spencer that fast is
Yeah, I'm not used to cycling a bolt
is
from the
not
shoulder.
easy.
I need some more practice there.
But it was good fun.
It was lots of fun.
You know what?
Oh, the
there
things
is
we do in science now.
there is a fun feeling to doing tactical reloads It feels very akin to doing a magazine change with an AR to dump a speed loader tube on the ground.
It just speaks to how fast things changed in the 19th century. So 1860, everyone else is either having a smooth bore or at best a rifle musket. The Prussians have the Dreise, which stacked up against that is not even a question. But 1860, they had that technology, that rate of fire, self-contained brass cartridges, and you kept up with charger-loaded SMLE, the quote-unquote fastest bolt-action, the Mad Minute rifle. Kept up with me, and I'm not great at the SMLE, but I'm not clumsy with it either.
This is my second, well, now it's my third day shooting a Spencer in the entire time I own the rifle. I gotta say, Christopher
Lord knows how
Spencer
many
was on to
rounds.
something. Gotta give him that.
Yeah, no, there's no question. That was space-age, cutting-edge firearms technology for its day. And we can argue the logistics, but all things being equal, if you take out the cost, if you take out the manufacturing difficulties, that is an incredible rifle. And if all things were the same, if it was as easy to produce those as 61 Springfields, yeah, the North would have won the war.
It would have been,
by the end of 62. It would have been
crushing.
game over. But alas, it didn't happen.
I was hitting at least 50% of those rounds. Which, if you take into account 700 or 800,
I probably hit 50%, but I was
700 or
cycling
800
more
of
than
these running as fast as you can feed them. That's a wall of lead.
anything. Yeah, that's again SMLE Mad Minute level of volume of fire. In 1860, I got to keep reminding everyone, 1860, not 1914. At Mons. 1860, first Manassas could have had that rate of fire, theoretically.
That was fun. Money well spent.
Logistics.
I wish these were still $40.
Yeah, true.
Well, on to the next
Oh, well,
test.
that was fun. Thanks, Chris.
So for those of you keeping score at home, here are the total results of our Spencer versus Springfield rifle comparison. While our conclusions were mixed, they were pretty much what we anticipated. The Spencer was remarkably effective up close, while the Springfield held its own and retained power and accuracy out to long ranges. When loaded from the Blakesley box, the Spencer can maintain a rate of fire nearly equal to that of iconic 20th century bolt-action rifles, which in itself is a remarkable statement of just how advanced the Spencer rifle was when it appeared in the 1860s. Thanks for watching.